The man who was on death row and responsible for taking 2 lives was about to be executed through electrocution. However, the guards who were supposed to carry out the execution were crying, causing a delay in the execution order. The warden, in response to the family's anger, could only give the command with tears in their eyes to turn on the electricity. When the electric current passed through the prisoner's body, this individual, who was considered an angel on earth, finally departed to reunite with God. Do you recall the time when he first arrived at the correctional facility? He destroyed all the cars, causing fear among the guards. They were apprehensive as they believed that if he resisted, it would be impossible to control him even with their combined efforts. However, what surprised us all was that despite his massive build, he had a gentle face like that of an angel. This man went by the name of John. When John first arrived at the prison, he asked the warden, Paul, if the lights were turned off at night because he was afraid of the dark. After their conversation, John politely extended his hand, showing himself as a friendly and kind person. Paul couldn't shake off his instincts that something was off about John. He discovered that not long ago, 2 young girls from a farming family went missing. The police and the father searched for them, and they were eventually found in John's arms, unresponsive. He was holding them and crying, and as a result, he was identified as their murderer. However, Paul had his doubts because he had encountered many twisted criminals before, but John seemed different. Despite being a death row warden, John had a deep faith in goodness. He believed that when a prisoner received a death sentence, it was a chance for them to make amends for their wrongdoing and find peace, free from pain and suffering. Regrettably, Paul did not receive a favorable bargain. He experienced an intense bladder ailment, causing him to perspire each time he visited the restroom due to the excruciating agony. Even at nighttime, he would awaken in discomfort. One day, a new inmate arrived at the penitentiary. It's important not to underestimate his appearance. However, when the correctional officers lowered their guard, he immediately demonstrated his true nature and effortlessly strangled a guard. Thankfully, his colleagues swiftly intervened and apprehended him. Subsequently, Paul collapsed to the ground in agony after this episode. During that time, John, who was confined in the cell, beckoned him to approach. Suddenly, an extraordinary event occurred. The detainee seized the guard and his arms slipped beneath him. The other prisoners erupted with enthusiasm at the sight. However, an unusual incident followed. The light bulb in the cell grew increasingly brighter until it exploded. John then released the guard and started coughing incessantly. Subsequently, dark insects emerged from his mouth and vanished into the air. Paul had a vague sense that his body was not quite right. He inquired of John what he had done. "I cured it," John replied before retiring to bed. In disbelief, Paul made his way to the restroom, where he discovered that his bladder infection had disappeared. It was only then that he experienced the relief he had never felt before. Following this event, Paul's confidence in the notion that John was a killer diminished even further. Therefore, he decided to reach out to John's defense lawyer in order to gather additional information. It became apparent to him that the attorney was prejudiced against individuals of color, which made it even more challenging for John, being an African American, to obtain legal support from that side. Nevertheless, Paul's skepticism persisted, and he expressed his gratitude towards John by gifting him a slice of bread. However, when William saw it, he expressed a desire to have some as well. Paul responded by instructing William to be quiet, but William responded by spitting in his face. But Paul didn't take the situation seriously at first, but his actions only made things worse. When the guards passed by, he grabbed one by the throat and used vulgar language to humiliate him, causing the guard to become frightened. Another inmate saw the incident and he taunted him because the guard was a second-generation official who relied on his connections to act arrogantly and domineeringly. The guard was generally afraid of those who were weak and tough, and was particularly prone to holding grudges. Several days later, it was time for the prisoner's execution, but the second generation of officials still have a grudge about the previous incident, so he deliberately did not wet the sponge and put it on the prisoner's head. After the electricity was turned on, the prisoner did not die at first. Seeing him screaming miserably, the crowd also noticed the anomaly. But it was too late because now the execution can't be interrupted. The prisoner will suffer even more. In a few seconds, the prisoner's entire body was smoking. John seemed to feel pain too, sitting on the bed and trembling. Once the execution concluded, the official's colleagues physically assaulted him, but he remained indifferent and showed no signs of remorse. By chance, Paul learned during his work report that the leader's wife had developed brain cancer and was gravely ill. Upon hearing the news, Paul's first thought was of John. To create unnecessary chaos, he utilized the cover of night to sneak John out of prison. The leader observed as his wife was embraced by another strong man, but made no attempt to intervene. Suddenly, the wife's mouth began to radiate, and she began to expel an unfamiliar substance. Within moments, the man had absorbed it into his body, causing the entire house to quake with an immense surge of energy. Within a brief period, the woman's physical condition fully recovered, including the complete eradication of the brain tumor that had plagued her. However, John's behavior diverged from previous events. He did not expel the black insects this time. Subsequently, John was returned to prison in a weakened state, as if something were stuck in his throat, causing considerable discomfort. Unexpectedly, when a guard passed by, John grasped his hand and forcibly expelled the black insects from his body into the guard's mouth. This action provoked the guard, who was a member of the second generation, to lose his sanity. He stormed into William's cell, brandishing a gun and fatally shooting him. Upon his arrival, Paul inquired as to why John had taken such actions. John responded to punish the evildoers. He then extended his hand, and when Paul grasped it, he received a revelation. It emerged that William was the actual perpetrator of the sisters' murder, and John had attempted to employ his mystical abilities to save them, but it was too late. Tragically, John had been unjustly accused and convicted of the crime. Despite his ability to discern the truth, Paul was unable to exonerate John because no one would believe in miracles. Although he acknowledged the truth, John urged Paul not to be disheartened and affirmed that God's work was complete. As his execution drew near, John requested that Paul take him to see a movie, fulfilling his final wish. The time of John's execution had arrived. John requested that he not be blindfolded due to his fear of the dark. This elicited an emotional response from the guards, who shed tears for a prisoner for the first time. Paul approached and clasped John's hand once more in a manner similar to their first meeting, as a final farewell. Then, with tears streaming down his face, Paul issued the execution order. When the electrical current surged through John's body, everyone present was overwhelmed with emotion. The angels, who had come to save the world, had arrived only to find a place teeming with demons. They departed in disappointment, leaving Paul to resign from his position. After many years, Paul persists in living a healthy life. As he witnesses the passing of each of his beloved ones, he interprets it as a divine retribution to make amends for his previous mistreatment of the angels.